Right, so for living environment week 6, this week's text has 3 different sections. This is section 1, the mechanics of evolution, natural selection. And it goes from page 1 to the top of page 4. And as we read, we're going to make sure that we model, or I'm going to model how to highlight key details about how natural selection works, as well as conditions needed for natural selection to occur. All right, so we're at the first paragraph at the top of page 1. Darwin did not only suggest that species evolved, he also suggested how that evolution might have occurred. Darwin thought that the mechanism of evolution was like the process of artificial selection, practiced by many breeders of plants and animals. And if we don't remember what artificial selection is, we can go down to the footnote, which says that artificial selection is also called selective breeding, and it's a process by which humans breed plants and animals selectively to develop particular traits by choosing which typically plant or animal males and females will sexually reproduce and have offspring together, right? He used the term natural selection, I'm going to highlight that, to indicate that the process of evolution was controlled by nature rather than people. I'm going to highlight that. In the process of natural selection, individuals that are able to breed, right, to mate with other organisms and reproduce, and pass their genetic information to the next generation. Those that are not successful in the environment often die without leaving any offspring. Let's highlight that. All right, so your check for understanding is, what is a similarity between artificial selection and natural selection? Well, I know that in both artificial and natural selection, the more desirable traits are reproduced to future generations, but in natural selection, humans play no role. Okay. So again, you can be copying my annotations, or you can be writing your own version, but if you needed a model, you could use those. All right. Overview of evolution. Darwin's ideas about evolution are easy to understand. In any environment, an individual may be born with a characteristic that makes them stronger, faster, any sort of advantage that will make him help it survive and reproduce. The individuals that prove to be best adapted to their environment will be more likely to survive. And if they do survive, their favorable characteristics will be passed on to many of their offspring. As a result, these useful adaptations, if we don't remember what adaptation is, let's look down here at the footnote. It's a physical or behavioral trait that allows an organism to survive in their environment. Okay. As a result, these useful adaptations, which first appear randomly, are likely to become, I'm going to highlight that, and likely to become more and more common with each generation. Similarly, characteristics that reduce an individual's chance of surviving and reproducing will tend to decrease over time. The long-term result of natural selection is a change in the frequency of certain traits in a population. Beneficial traits tend to become more common. I'm going to highlight that. And harmful traits become less common. I'm going to highlight that. As the frequency of a trait in a population increases or decreases over time, it can be said that the species is evolving, it's changing, right? An individual itself does not evolve. Each is born with genetic information that may or may not help it survive and reproduce. But as natural selection leads to changes in the composition of a population, let's highlight that. A population may have more individuals with a certain favorable characteristic than it did earlier. I'm going to highlight that. Look at the image below to see an example of natural selection and the evolution of population mice of different fur colors. So first we see a population of mice has moved to an area where the rocks are very dark. We see 3 dark colored mice and about 6 light colored mice here. Due to natural genetic variation, some of the mice are black while others are tan. And it says here, some mice are eaten by these predatory birds you see. And now in the next time-lapse image, it says, tan mice are more visible to predatory birds than black mice. Thus, tan mice are eaten with higher frequency than the black mice are, right? They can be seen easier from the predators. Only the surviving mice reach reproductive age and leave offspring. So we see how the surviving mice, there's more black mice than the tan mice that are reaching the age where they can reproduce. Therefore, we can predict that there will be more black mice in the next generation. Let's see. Mice reproduce, giving the next generation. Because black mice had a higher chance of leaving offspring than tan mice, the next generation contains a higher fraction of black mice than the previous generation. We're right. So, question that Mr. Weisler wants you to answer here is, what is an adaptation that you think should pop up in the human population in order to help us survive for many generations to come? Okay, so you can write that answer, pause, and then press play when you're ready to pick it back up. Interactions and evolution. The driving force behind evolution is the interaction between individual organisms and their environment. Conditions that are vital, means like essential to the process of evolution, include the potential for species to increase its numbers in overproduction, the finite or the limited supply of resources needed for life, genetic variation of offspring due to mutation, and genetic recombination. I'm gonna highlight that. Oops. And selection by the environment of those offspring better to able to survive and reproduce. All of these conditions, which are explained below, are involved in the process of evolutionary change. Overproduction. In each generation, a species has the potential to produce more offspring than can possibly survive. Okay, I'll highlight that. Species with high reproductive potential include bacteria, insects, dandelions, rabbits. In all the offspring these organisms survive, they would actually overrun the Earth. However, that doesn't actually happen. Scientists have learned that in stable environments, the population of a species remains about the same from one year to the next, right? If we recall before, when we learned about carrying capacity, we learned how limiting factors help balance these populations out, right? For example, no matter how many deer are born in one year, at the same time next year, there will be about the same number of deer that there was the year before. Similarly, as shown in this image, some species of fish lay millions of eggs, but by the next year, the population of that species is about the same as it was the previous year. This happens because not all of the new individuals that are born to be hatched will survive adulthood. I'm going to highlight that. So now you can pause and explain what the term is that you've learned to refer to the maximum number of species of a population that an ecosystem can support. And then, why do populations like fish overproduce each year? Go ahead and pause and then press play when you're ready to move on. The struggle for survival, competition. Overproduction leads to competition among members of a species. That's important. I'm going to highlight that. Not all offspring survive long enough to reproduce. In many cases, chance determines which offspring survive. For example, wind may blow a dandelion seed to a patch of fertile soil or into a lake. That's chance, right? It wasn't predetermined. Or a deer may be born in a wildlife preserve or in the path of a forest fire, right? Those two chance situations can have incredibly different outcomes. But chance is not the only factor which determines which offspring will survive and which will die. The offspring all have to cope with environmental limiting factors, such as temperature, disease, parasites, and predators. You should highlight that too. They all need resources such as oxygen, water, food, and shelter, right? These are finite resources. They're limited. However, the supply of these resources is finite. If they are able to survive, organisms of the same species must compete for these limited or finite resources. Depending on their success as competitors, individuals will get the resources they need to survive or they will not. Those that are best suited to their environment, like if they have traits that help them get those resources, they are more likely to survive. Many of the losers, the ones who didn't have those traits that help them get those resources, will struggle to get the resources or they will die before they have a chance to reproduce. So right now you're going to pause and describe how competition is a condition involved in the natural selection of a species. Pause and then press play when you're ready to move on. Variation. The new traits that can lead to evolution come from normal variations within a species. Organisms within a species are never exactly alike. For example, some adult grasshoppers have longer legs than others. Some have a lighter body color. In any group of gray squirrels, some have sharper or longer claws, lighter or darker fur, bigger or smaller ears, and so on. The differences among offspring are due to genetic information, which is the unique combination of traits each organism inherits from its parents. I'm going to highlight that. Some variations give individuals an advantage over others in their struggle for resources. I'm going to highlight that. Any trait that helps an organism survive and reproduce under a given set of environmental conditions is said to have adaptive value. That's really important. I'm going to highlight that. For example, a rabbit's ability to blend in with its surroundings may allow it to escape by capture by a fox. The coloration it inherited has adaptive value for the rabbit, allowing it to escape predators to survive. I'm going to highlight that because that's one way that a trait can have adaptive value. When the fox population is high, this adaptation is especially valuable to rabbits that inherit it. So right now, what you're going to do is you're going to explain what does it mean for a trait to have adaptive value. And then you can try and answer this, which is what are some variations between humans and do they have adaptive value? All right, last section of this, or last paragraph of this section. As Darwin proposed with his idea of natural selection, traits with an adaptive value in a specific environment give individuals in that environment a competitive advantage. Highlight that. If the beneficial trait is passed on to offspring, they too are more likely to survive and reproduce. The proportion of individuals with this advantageous characteristic will increase because they are better able to compete than individuals without that beneficial trait. Eventually, nearly all the individuals in the population will have that beneficial trait. The change in the characteristic present in the population over time is called evolution. Although some evolution may occur without too much change in the environment, it's usually the adaptation of a species to change its environment that brings about evolution. Therefore, a changing environment is often the driving force for evolutionary change. Let's look at this diagram. So we see the variation in these three species. Mutation is what causes this variation. And we see unfavorable mutations or traits are selected against in the environment. And the more beneficial traits are what survive and end up reproducing.